group that you're building an interface, any kind of UI, the things I'm talking about tonight, you've probably all run into. If you're still in school, you may not have run into this much yet, but you will. It's kind of what we all run into through development. So I'm going to kind of start off tonight with a scenario that those of you who've been working for a while, I know you've lived this story, so it'll probably relate to a lot of the rest of you as well. So, you're at the beginning of a project, and you have your kickoff meeting, and everybody's all excited, and everybody's at the table together. You've got your information architects, you've got your designer, you've got your developer, you've got the project manager, and maybe an account rep or something, and everybody's all really excited, and how this project is going to go better than all the others because everybody's going to work together, and it's all going to be good. And kind of time moves on a little bit, and there are wireframes created and some designs created, and fewer people keep showing up to the meetings. Now, sometimes the developers are, they're too busy finishing up some other project, or maybe the client doesn't want to keep paying for all the people in all the meetings, or sometimes, and this is a worst case, but sometimes the PM or someone thinks that, oh, well, we just don't need the developer at the table for this because this is just a design. It doesn't apply to them. And anyway, time keeps moving on. The project's moving along, and well, the design phase might slip a few days, maybe a week. The architecture phase, same type thing. Might slip a couple days, maybe a week, and then it comes time. There's a big meeting. And at this meeting, you, as a developer or lead developer, you walk into the meeting, and there's everybody that was at the original meeting was there, and also like the senior account manager, maybe the technology leadership, and then the project manager starts talking about how the timeline slipped. We're a couple weeks behind schedule, but we still need to get this done by the original due date because it's a really important client, or this is really good for the company. And then they all look at the developer and say, we can do that, right? And you don't have a choice. So what typically happens there is the developer gets kind of grumpy, gets a sour look on his face, and says, yeah, we'll do it, and then walks out. And then from there to the end of the project, he and the rest of the developers on the project are all really grumpy and probably working long hours. So it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to make everybody grumpy. And that grumpiness isn't, there are root causes to that you can avoid. And it's a symptom of something much worse than just someone just being a little unhappy. So tonight we're going to talk about what causes the grumpiness, how to prevent the grumpiness, and some of the other things that the grumpiness is related to. And grumpiness is kind of a nice way to say it, those of you who've been on projects like this. So,
you don't have any personal stories you're going to tell us?
No. That would not be good. Okay, so the goals for tonight are to talk about, these are the goals. Well, we want to increase the probability of success of a project, because all of these things that add up to grumpy developers also can add to the project either failing or being very late. Job satisfaction. If the developer's grumpy, he's probably not going to stick around very long, and you're going to have to go hire new developers. The decrease the animosity between groups. That's one thing that this particular group, Interact, has been from its very beginning. We've talked about is that trying to bridge the gap between design and development. And often there's a wall between the two, and some of the things we're talking about tonight is a way to bring down that wall. And scenarios like I laid out a second ago are part of the reason that wall exists. And cost overruns, time overruns, all of those are also very related to this. So we're going to work through those tonight. And tonight, mid-sentence, really? Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to wonder because those look suspiciously like bullet points to me.
No, those are pluses and minuses.
Okay, I'm just saying.
Anyway, tonight isn't going to be so much of a presentation as more of a discussion, more of a moderated discussion. So we're going to work through some points. We're going to talk about some different things. but I need all of you to participate. Even if you don't have experience in the field, if you're still in school, you can probably relate to a lot of this. And I mean, you don't have to talk. I'm not going to like point at someone and say, "You, I need an answer now." Maybe not. But the point of this is to be very open, very discussion oriented. And if nobody says anything, we'll be out of here in no time. So if that's motivating for you, then excuse me. So how we're going to do it is we're going to kind of work through the different groups and talk about some of the things that different groups are responsible for that impact the developer at the end, and not just the developer's job, but the whole success of the project. So, okay, I'm going to start asking questions, so now's the time to wake up and talk. I'm drinking coffee, that's what's keeping me awake. Information architecture, IA, sometimes this is called UX design in different shops. So I'll start asking questions since nobody's talking. What are some of the things you can think of that in that phase that information architects do during a project that can impact the whole cycle and possibly cause problems later on that aren't accounted for?
Wait, you're asking if information architects what problems they have?
No, things that information architects may introduce to a project.
Well, that cause problems.
That can cause problems downstream that are not anticipated. Not that information architects are trying to cause trouble.
So are you saying that information architects are bad?
Everybody has a slide here, not just information architects.
Okay.
Data structures.
Data structures. So elaborate.
You create an object that has a certain amount of information that it's available, that it can handle, certain parameters that it has, and so you limit the scope of what this piece of information can do.
Okay.
So an information architect says, I have the scope that has 20 things that can do something, and I'm going to account for all 20 of those things, and now I've done my information architecture.
And then later on,
There's 30 or 40.
Or like when he does that, right? And the way it's done, and the way maybe he does like lays out the different theoretical screens that might be in it, or the sketch flows, or whatever. Maybe he skips like something like actually how that data gets in the system, or he misses a field which makes it so the screen doesn't make sense. Like maybe there's an invoice screen without the total.
that would be silly.
Well, but I mean, I know that's a ridiculous example.
No, that's actually, I have that in a more broad area. A wireframe that doesn't have all the features on it. That if there is functionality that isn't actually accounted for. Because if it's not in the wireframe, it's not going to get into the design, and if it's not in the design, then the developer's stuck with, hey, the spec says it's supposed to do this, but I don't see where it's putting. So, what else? What else can anyone think of that they've run into, or can they, imagine can be a problem in the very beginning?
Well, if you don't involve the designers and the developers early on with questions, get them involved in their buy-up and input early on, that will have input impact down the road.
Absolutely. And actually, for those of you actually listening, that answer will apply to pretty much every single slide.
Communication.
Exactly. Anything else?
More communication.
Yeah. How about? Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say this piece of the process or business workflow.
What's that?
Piece of the process or business workflow. So you have gaps in the workflow and process.
Yep. Holes in the flow. Absolutely. Things like that are problems. How about even at a broader, just concepts that are stale, that are boring, that are, things that have been overdone. That's kind of more designy than architecture, but it's still in the same area. That doesn't necessarily impact the developer as far as will the project be on time, but it makes everybody along the way downstream from there, it makes the project less appealing, both internally and then also end up to the client and their users. Like, okay, well, this isn't very fun to work on. Anything else anybody can think of for information architecture? Okay, we're going to be out of here quick tonight. Okay, the designers. Now I know there's a lot of people in here that are design oriented. So design is an area where there are some specific things that can can very specifically affect development. I mean, just design elements that can throw wrenches into development, and without the designers even knowing. Because anybody think? I know you've got some ideas. Well, what are some things that you know of that can be on a design that really impact development?
Well, just certain. I mean, you can put it in the context of whatever tools you want to use, but a certain, let's say, a data grid, and a certain way of using a data grid, or a combo box, or all of these little user interface gadgets. I'll use that as a word that have this really rich functionality that maybe isn't necessarily accounted for in the back end, or even accounted for in how your back end is going to interact with your front end. Make it fancy, and I haven't even touched on the graphical part of it. Should I go into that as well?
Well, let's let some other people answer and
Yeah,
I'll come back to you. Okay, who else? What other things during design can affect scope, possibly? Certainly design, the development process, the project itself.
Maybe they come up with you.
Yeah, you.
Me? Oh, okay. Maybe the designers, I've seen a lot of times them come up with things that used to not be easy to implement. So they come up with some transcendental thing that takes like 3 years to implement under the right ideal conditions, and then expect it done in 6 weeks.
Absolutely. That happens very frequently. One of my favorites in that was shadows, drop shadows. Designers love drop shadows. And I like drop shadows too, but some, especially, well, like I'm a Silverlight developer. Prior to Silverlight 3, drop shadows were not easy. They were pretty difficult. And you'd still get designs full of drop shadows. So that was one of my pet peeves. So what else?
Anything with 3D.
Anything with 3D.
Anything with 3D.
Yeah.
Amen, brother.
Good one. What else? Anybody else? Yes.
I think if your design doesn't really match what's going on with maybe the client's expectation, and all of a sudden you want to change something in the design, it affects it.
That's a big one, actually. When designs change, the design changes like you're talking about can change the scope of development unintentionally. Sometimes the designer and with what you're talking about can add. Sometimes they'll just add a checkbox or something to a design that wasn't in the specification or wasn't in the information architecture, but that control, whatever it is, can change the scope drastically without the designer even realizing it. So that's a very good example. Or changes to the design after development have already started, which, depending on the platform you're coding and the type of change, sometimes that can drastically hurt things. Sometimes not, depending on your environment, but at times that can really hurt things. What else do people have?